I'm a street rock guy, you know, and this has such a 60s vibe to it because, you know, I was there. I remember those days in the magazines. I didn't, you know, have anything like this in New Jersey, but to see something like this is just incredible. I didn't even know this existed.
Good morning, I'm Randy Durr. I'm here at the NNL East 2024 edition. It's April 27th, right at 9 o'clock. The line is around the building, but soon this room will be filled with models and model builders ready to show off their latest creations here at NNL East. With me is
Paul and Agnostopoulos, also here for this show.
And we're both really excited about a specific display here today, and that is this special model built by Dave Shuklis. If you remember from the Auto World days of the early 60s, Dave was one of the primary builders of a lot of the models, and Dave also contributed a lot of his materials to the model car magazines of that era. This is a particularly special model in that it was only recently rediscovered, and it is now being donated to the International Model Car Builders Museum in Salt Lake City, Utah.
He, as Randy said, was around in the early 60s and sort of represented advanced model building at the time. And so the museum's really happy to acquire this to add to their collection. What was amazing about this fellow was that he was actually severely handicapped, and yet he ended up building these very detailed models. If you look in here, you'll see, for example, the engine is detailed, there's great detail on the interior, and so forth.
I have had a vague memory of going to Auto World as a kid. This was on the back wall, in a case, in the back. You couldn't really get to it as a customer. But I do remember seeing this. It was big, inspired me to buy, I guess, the big drag, which is, I think, where a lot of these parts came from. The wheels, the slicks, and the seats.
And I love that induction on the engine. You know, I mean, that's the kind of thing I would put on a model today. And it's just such an amazing thing. And of course, if somebody built an 8th scale model like this today, it would still be a terrific model, and it would be, you know, competitive in whatever class it was in. You know, he had a great imagination, and he did a great job on these models, especially overcoming those handicaps that he had. You know, that whole story of Dave Shuklis is so amazing and so inspiring. You know, he would, from what I hear, he would lay on his living room floor and work on models because he couldn't, you know, sit up to do that.
He persevered as the muscular dystrophy progressed. He just kept building, no matter what it took. He knew what he wanted. He was also writing for Car Model magazine, doing work for Oscar Kowaleski at Auto World.
Here with Rich Warner,
One of his personal friends.
I don't know how he could push the button on a spray can, but he made his way through it all. He truly did. David's hands were terribly deformed, so that they were kind of bent over backwards, and he'd have to try and drill out an antenna base and get it to pieces to fit. He had terrible problems with his fingers, his hands. David was confined to living on his living room floor, and they had a mattress on that. And that's where David would see his friends. We'd go up and he'd be laying there on the floor, see who's going to stop by that day. But a tremendously gifted young man, just who had physical disabilities. His great personality. He liked the difficult moment for people. I mean, he kind of thrilled in that. He had one of these cars, I don't know which one, but if you push the antenna, the trunk would open. And in order to make that work, you had to make an antenna that had a collapsible stem. And you had to cut the trunk open on the car and make a trunk so that when you push the antenna, the trunk would come up. People weren't doing that in the 60s. He was one of the first with working lights. On Friday afternoon at the Scranton Hobby Center twice a year, there would be a model car contest. The final entries had to be in on Friday, judging on Friday night, and then the winners announced on Saturday. And David always showed up at 5 to 5 on Friday, and he would have, the headlights would work on some of his cars. We never saw the pieces, and he's got them making the headlights work on the cars. This car, I believe, several articles on this about making a convertible roof work on it. He built the convertible roofs that they open and close on these. And David did it drilling like this. That's the miraculous thing. He did it with clawed type figures. In order for these to work, he had to have metal. They had to have metal frames. And he would just cut strips of grass, drill them out, configure them just like a convertible roof, and then he would miniaturize it to make the thing work. All with things that we never saw at that time period in the Scranton area. He would just, you go over to the Hobby Center on Saturday to see what did he introduce. And when he comes up the street in a wheelchair with that pushing him, you get an idea of what he overcame to make that happen.
He had a great support group in Canada.
He did, yeah, he did. Very, very close with Oscar, Smitty from Auto World, Mike Baltus, Paul Sable. Some really good model builders. You still can't believe some of the cars that David built back then. And we have no idea where the idea or the inspiration or some of the supplies came from. Because I would look at the stuff and say, David, how did you do that? And he would explain paper clips and blocks of plastic and hog it up and then break the glue joint and the hinges will work. But he did all of that stuff, and we would just go and see it and say, first I've seen that, but it was the real deal. I'd often wondered if he had the time to learn about the brass that we play with now and some of those things, what would he have done? And then I always, in my mind, draw a little edge and say maybe he couldn't have. He would have found a way. He'd have his mother out there holding the button, but he'd find a way to make that work. Brilliant man. He went to a larger scale. And he was playing with some big deuces at that time. Ravel had some big coops out. And David's always in a good mood. But God bless him, there's nothing that he wouldn't try.
He inspired so many modelers of the day to get these kits, to build them, to modify them, make some changes on them, I didn't know he had done a large-scale model, but I'm just really jazzed over this thing because I love these street rods, and it's wonderful.
At the time, there wasn't a 5-window coupe body. There wasn't even a coupe body. You could get a T-bucket. So he built this body out of wood. It didn't slow him down, the fact that he couldn't get what he wanted. He had wheels. He could get this nice small block Chevy, which of course was pretty high-tech stuff back then. That was the new motor. What do you think of this color?
Oh, I think it's terrific. I mean, imagine back then seeing a sort of candy color like this on a model. This was probably like the first issue of those kind of colors for modelers. And it's remarkable, and it is so well preserved.
And we thank Jim Baker for donating it to the International Model Car Builders Museum. The museum has provided a binder with the history of the kit, Car Model Magazine, and so many of the articles that were written. This is how Dave built the model using wood. Lots of good stuff, more articles that went on and on. I mean, what a beautiful build.
And we're just so lucky to have it here this year. We're really happy that they brought it for us to all see.
Well, we can thank Jim Baker for his efforts in rescuing it.
And I think many of you are familiar with the museum. Having attended GSL in the past and visited that city, I visited that museum several times, and it's just a wonderful collection of literature, kits, built models, contest memorabilia. It's just tremendous. My favorite is the Don Emmons collection of built models. I grew up reading Model Car Science, and Don Emmons had a regular article in that magazine called Detail for Real, and that struck a chord with me. I just really liked his work, and I think it kind of formed the basis for a lot of my model building techniques as well. Some of his significant models are on display there at the museum. You really need to get out there and see all that.
What is amazing about the museum, as Randy said, is that it covers the entire history of, what you would say, of plastic model building, both with the magazines and the actual collections of models. Also at the museum, there are things like parts packs, paints from the era, none of which are probably usable today.
You never know.
But you never know. And other things besides models to try to cover the entire model building hobby. So the museum's really happy to get this model, and just shows that the museum is going to continue to acquire things that are relevant to the hobby in hopes of spreading out their representation of all the decades of model building.
So if you get a chance, get on out to Salt Lake City, Utah, visit the International Model Car Builders Museum and take a look around, and you can just immerse yourself in the history of our wonderful hobby. Thank you.
Thank you.